Have you ever wondered what really happened in the past? Beyond the pages of textbooks lies a world of fascinating tales, extraordinary figures, and incredible events. Join me as we explore them on Exploring History in Sleep. In a forgotten mountain village shrouded in snow and silence, people survive not by strength, but by never speaking after dark. For generations, they've believed that noise invites death, and when the whispers start again, no one dares to listen. Except one girl. Edda, an orphan with nothing left but her silence, begins to hear voices that come before tragedy. When children disappear and shadows move without form, she's forced to confront the truth that's haunted her village for decades. What happens when silence is no longer protection, but a prison? And what stirs in the dark when someone dares to answer the whisper? This is the beginning of a chilling medieval tale where every word spoken could summon death. Welcome to Story 1 of When Silence Was Gold, but Death Lurked. Story 1. The Bell That Broke the Silence. The mist settled thickly over the village of Eldermore that morning, muffling every sound and draping the cottages in ghostly shrouds. It was a village much like any other in the heartlands, quiet and unassuming, but beneath its serene facade lay whispers of something much darker. People moved slowly, cautiously, as though the very air might fracture if disturbed. It was here, in this village forgotten by maps and time, that Marian first encountered her strange fate. Marian had always believed her life was comfortably predictable. She was to marry Jonathan, the village blacksmith, a sturdy, dependable man who never raised his voice or hand. They were a portrait of humble contentment, living at the edge of the village, where the forest crept in close and the nights were always darker. Yet that calm veneer was fragile, hiding secrets neither dared to voice aloud. The day began oddly. Marian woke not to the familiar warmth of Jonathan beside her, but to a chill that seeped through the blankets, as though someone had opened a window wide. But there was no open window, only a faint scent of earth, damp and fresh, lingering near the bed. She reached out instinctively for Jonathan, but her hand met empty air. The bed beside her was cold, untouched. She sat up sharply, her heart quickening. "Jonathan!" Her voice was swallowed by the silence, a heavy quiet pressing down, stifling her words before they could echo. She wrapped herself in a shawl, stepping gingerly onto the cold wooden floor. Each creak beneath her feet felt amplified, intrusive. She found him in the kitchen, standing motionless at the window, staring out into the dense fog. His posture was rigid, unusual for the relaxed man she knew so well. His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white and strained. "Jonathan?" she repeated softly, approaching cautiously, unsure why she felt such dread creeping along her spine. Slowly, as if waking from a trance, he turned. His face was pale, his eyes distant and glassy, reflecting nothing. "It's calling again," he murmured, voice scarcely more than a breath. Marian felt a cold finger of fear trace down her spine. "What's calling?" she asked, barely daring to breathe. But Jonathan didn't answer, simply shook his head slowly and turned back to the window. Marian joined him, peering through the fog, but saw nothing except shadows dancing between the trees. An uneasy quiet filled the kitchen, broken only by the distant dripping of water somewhere beyond the walls. That afternoon, the villagers moved about their tasks as if held by strings, puppeteered by something unseen. Conversations were brief, hushed whispers punctuated by anxious glances toward the ever-encroaching forest. Marian felt isolated, a creeping paranoia settling deep in her gut. Helena, the elderly woman who ran the village apothecary, beckoned Marian over as she walked the muddy path through the village square. Helena's ancient face was drawn, the deep wrinkles etched by worry rather than time. "You feel it, don't you?" Helena asked quietly, her bony fingers gripping Marian's wrist with surprising strength. "Feel what?" Marian asked, attempting to keep the tremble from her voice. "The silence," Helena whispered urgently. "When silence comes here, death follows. It always has." Marian shook her head, desperate to dispel the creeping dread. "It's just fog, Helena. Nothing more." But Helena's eyes narrowed, her grip tightening. "Don't fool yourself, girl. There are secrets older than us in these woods, and they don't sleep quietly forever. Ask your husband what he hears. He knows." Marian pulled away, disturbed and frightened. As she hurried homeward, she tried to dismiss Helena's words, yet they echoed relentlessly in her mind. That evening, Marian prepared dinner, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Jonathan sat silently by the fire, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames, unmoving, unresponsive. Marian felt the tension coiling tighter within her chest, her pulse quickening with each passing moment of oppressive silence. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, she knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his knee. He flinched, startling her. "Jonathan, please, talk to me." "What's happening?" she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. He turned slowly, his eyes hollow with something like grief. "I hear it clearly now. Every night it grows louder. It whispers my name, Marian. It whispers things no one should know." "What things?" she pressed, her voice barely audible. Jonathan leaned in, eyes wide and haunted. "It knows about the child, Marian." Marian's breath caught sharply, her hand instinctively covering her abdomen. "How could it know?" "I don't know," Jonathan said, his voice breaking. "But it's coming for it. For us." Fear surged through her, raw and primal. The child had been their secret, shared only between hopeful whispers and tender caresses. How could something from beyond the trees know? That night, Marian lay awake, clutching Jonathan's hand, both too afraid to sleep. Outside, the mist thickened, wrapping their small cottage tighter in its cold embrace. In the stillness, Marian strained to hear beyond the silence. Then, just at the edge of perception, she heard it, a faint whisper threading through the mist, barely discernible yet unmistakably calling Jonathan's name. She felt him tense beside her, his hand gripping hers painfully. "It's here," he breathed, voice quivering with terror. Marian held her breath, heart pounding violently as the whispers grew louder, closer, relentless. And then, suddenly, silence returned, heavier, darker, suffocating. They lay frozen in that unbearable quiet, each second stretching into eternity, until a gentle knock sounded at the door, breaking the tension yet filling them with a new, chilling dread. Jonathan rose unsteadily, reaching for the door with trembling fingers. Marian wanted to scream, to stop him, but her voice was trapped, suffocated by the silence. The door creaked open slowly, revealing only endless mist, dense and waiting. As Jonathan stepped forward, his silhouette disappearing into the fog, Marian knew with a crushing certainty that nothing would ever be the same. And in the silence that remained, death lingered patiently, inevitable and unseen, waiting only for its moment. Story 2. The Ashen Path. The ash from the old woods did not fall like snow. It drifted slow and dry, clinging to skin with a warmth that was not warmth at all, more like memory or the breath of something once alive but long buried. The people of Dromark avoided the eastern pass where the aspen trees grew white and twisted, and where no birds perched. They said the trees remembered fire. But Edda, now marked by the voice and spared by the scream, had no more places left to hide. In the weeks after the bell's cry split the heavens, Dromark began to change. The silence didn't return, but it frayed. Words were spoken with caution. Doors creaked open with fear. The villagers stepped lightly, as if the snow might crack and swallow them whole. And yet, in the presence of sound, life crept back, tentative, tremulous, like the first crocus pushing through frost. But Edda could still hear it. Not the voice that had not returned, but a hum beneath the ground, low and resonant, like something vast turning over in its sleep. When she placed her hand on the earth, it vibrated. And sometimes, in the smoke of Helma's fire, she thought she saw faces. The elders kept their distance. They had given her the bell, but now they offered no answers. Helma, for her part, had grown quieter. Her eyes lingered longer on the window. Her weaving took on strange patterns, tight loops and jagged threads that no longer formed flowers but sigils. Edda asked once what she was making. Helma only said, "A warning." Then came the night of the wolves. They did not howl. They did not growl. They came in silence, a pack of 13, each one larger than any beast Edda had ever seen. They moved through the village with purpose, eyes white and mouths closed. No blood was spilled, no flesh torn. Instead, they stood before houses and stared. At one, they lingered. And when they left, so did the soul within. A baby, only days old, vanished from its crib, the blankets still warm. The village fell into panic. But it was a quiet panic. No one dared raise their voice. The memory of the scream had branded itself into their bones. Edda knew she would have to go. The bell had been a key, not a weapon. It had unlocked something ancient. And whatever it was not content to whisper any more. It wanted. She packed what little she had, dried bread, a knife, Helma's shawl. Helma pressed a kiss to her forehead, her eyes brimming with something that wasn't quite sorrow. "You must find the ashen path," she said, "where the trees remember." "Will I find it?" Edda asked. "You won't. It'll find you." With those words, she set out. Into the forest. Into the white. The snow was deeper than it looked. It clung to her skirts, sucked at her boots. But she moved fast, led by something she could not name. The whisper didn't guide her, but the silence did. Whenever the air grew too still, she turned. Whenever a bird sang, she pressed forward. After 2 days, the trees changed. Their bark turned pale. Their branches tangled. The ground grew soft with ash. And then she saw them. Figures. Not quite people. Standing among the trees. Draped in robes the color of dust. Faces wrapped in linen. Eyes exposed, black, wide, endless. They made no sound. But they watched. Edda did not flee. She walked between them, heart a drumbeat. They parted for her like water. And when she passed, they turned, always watching, never blinking. In the heart of the grove, she found the altar. It was not stone but bone. Towering, cracked, carved with names in languages no tongue now spoke. Around it, candles burned, not wax, but fat. Human, she thought. A voice rose, not a whisper, not the voice, but something deeper. Older. "You rang the bell." Edda stepped forward. "It came for me." "No. It awoke for you." "What is it?" Silence. Then a shape moved behind the altar. Cloaked in shadow. No face, only teeth. It opened its arms. And she saw. Not with eyes. Not with thought. But with something primal, something buried in the marrow. She saw a village before Dromark. A place of stone and fire, ruled by a voice that could bend men's will. It whispered power. And those who listened were rewarded. Until they asked for more. Until the voice demanded silence, total, permanent, devoted. One by one, the people gave it. First their songs. Then their stories. then their children. And when they had no more to offer, the voice devoured them. Only one escaped. A woman, pregnant, running into the snow. Edda fell to her knees. "It's in me," she said. "That woman, she was." "Your blood remembers," said the figure. "But blood is not destiny. What do you want from me?" "To choose." And then silence. But not emptiness. A choice. Two paths. One leading back to Dromark. One deeper into the woods, where the voice slumbered still. Edda rose. Her hand found the bell in her cloak. She stepped forward, and the forest closed behind her. Story 3. Beneath the Bone Roots. They said the roots ran deeper here, deeper than memory, deeper than blood. And Edda, walking beneath twisted boughs where no bird dared settle, began to feel it. Not in her feet, which ached from cold and throbbed with cuts, nor in her breath, which misted in short bursts of pain. She felt it in her teeth, in the marrow of her bones, a low thrum, like a buried heart pulsing beneath centuries of earth. The ashen path had led her beyond the realm of maps. Here, silence wasn't absence, it was substance. It pressed against her eardrums, bent the air, folded time. Day and night bled into each other, marked only by the flicker of her lantern, which now burned not with oil, but a strange resin Helma had given her, thick, green, and smelling faintly of rot. The watchers followed still, always just beyond sight, always just behind. They left no tracks, cast no breath. Edda never heard them walk. But when she turned, the trees shifted, subtly, unnaturally, as if they bent aside to let something through. She reached a clearing by dawn, if dawn it was. The sky had turned a sickly bronze, and the trees stood still as statues. In the center of the clearing, half buried in frozen moss, was a stone circle. Not carved by human hands, but grown, twisted stone that had sprouted like fungus. Beneath each arch, bones lay in cradles of roots. A figure waited. Not the creature from the altar. This one was smaller, human-shaped. Its face was uncovered, and it looked like a man, save for the eyes, white as snow, veined with black. It held a crooked staff made of horn, and when it spoke, the air curled. "You carry the bell still." Edda nodded. "You passed through ash and silence. You saw the altar. You were given a choice. I chose this path. You chose hunger." Edda narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked between the arches, motioning for her to follow. She hesitated only a second. Then she stepped inside the circle, and the air changed. It was no longer cold. It was no longer anything. She could not feel her feet, her arms, her breath. The light from her lantern vanished, and yet she could see a strange red illumination that came from nowhere. The ground beneath them wasn't stone or earth, but bone. Miles of it. Endless ribs, femurs, spines, arranged in spirals and lattices like some ancient cathedral. Roots grew through skulls. Teeth lined the walls. And far ahead, something pulsed. "The heart of the grove," the man said. "It remembers the voice. It feeds on echoes." "Why bring me here?" "Because you still resist. And if you resist, you can still decide." "Decide what?" "To kill it, or become it." They reached the center. The heart was not a metaphor. It was a literal thing, vast, wet, throbbing, suspended in roots like a spider's prize. It beat once every minute, each thump shaking the bone walls. Edda stepped closer. The bell in her hand vibrated. Her ears rang. And then it began. Visions. Children buried in snow, eyes open, mouths stitched. Women screaming into pillows, their voices sucked away. Men kneeling before the altar, cutting their tongues with reverence. Villages burning. Smoke rising. A voice speaking from inside the flames. "You carry its echo," the guide whispered. "But you do not yet carry its will." Edda fell to her knees. Blood trickled from her nose. Her vision swam. But she did not look away. "I need to know," she gasped, "what it wants." The man hesitated. Then softly he said, "It wants you to listen." And Edda did. She let go. She let the bell fall. She pressed her hands to the roots. And she listened. What she heard wasn't a voice. It was a memory. A scream held so long it had fermented. A sorrow so deep it had become structure. The forest hadn't grown around it. The forest had grown from it. And it spoke in silence. She rose, eyes wide. Her hands bled, her ears bled, but she stood. "I know what it is now." The man looked at her. "And it's not a monster. It's a wound." He said nothing. "We did this," she whispered. "We made it, fed it, buried it, and now it awakens," the man finished. "And you must choose what to do with its awakening." Edda picked up the bell. It felt heavier, warmer. She turned back toward the surface, the watchers, the snow. The forest did not stop her. But as she walked away, she heard the heart beat one last time. And it said her name. Story 4. Hollow Tongues. They say language is power, that words shape the world. But in the hinterlands where Edda now trod, words were not spoken. Here, silence was law, and speech was sin. The snow no longer crunched beneath her feet. Instead, it sighed, as if reluctant to remember weight, as if eager to forget that anything had dared step across it. When she left the bone cathedral behind, she thought she might have been reborn. Her ears no longer bled, but they rang with a high tone, a ghost note that never resolved. The bell in her hand pulsed with warmth now, not heat. It felt alive. More than that, it felt listening. And that frightened her more than anything she'd faced in the glade of bone. She found the next village by accident. It wasn't on any map she remembered, and no paths led to it, just broken trails half swallowed by frost. The houses here were short, round things, sunk halfway into the earth. Their chimneys did not smoke. Their windows did not flicker. But the people inside were very much alive. They wore masks. Not for cold, but for quiet. Full-face things made of smoothed bark and stitched linen, painted with solemn expressions. No mouths. Just hollow eye sockets. The elder met her at the center of the hamlet. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He simply bowed, then pointed to her bell. She held it up, uncertain. He nodded. Then, slowly, he peeled his mask away. He had no tongue. Neither did the others. She learned this gradually, as more villagers gathered. Some signed with their hands, but mostly they used glances, breath, and the rustling of cloth. Communication was ritual. Intent was a sacred dance. And sound was sacred. Through trial and slow trust, Edda learned that the village was built around a well. Not for water, but memory. If one stood close enough, if one dared lean over the lip, they would hear the past whispering. Not in words, in feelings, in impressions. And sometimes, when the moon was high, in names. The bell reacted to it. Every night it hummed louder. And every night her dreams bled stranger. She dreamt of her sister, the one she'd buried long ago, walking backward into a fire, laughing. She dreamt of a man with no face-painting runes on her chest while she slept. She dreamt of herself, grown old and blind, cradling a child made entirely of teeth. The elder showed her the carvings, deep under the meeting hall. Grooves in stone, older than the village, older than language. They resembled waveforms, he explained by tapping rhythmically on the wall. A transcription of sound into shape, into permanence. One shape repeated more than any other. A spiral, but not quite. Twisting inwards, then jutting outward sharply, like a thorn caught mid-growth. It made Edda dizzy to look at. Her bell rang when she touched it, and she saw, not dream, but vision. A hall of voices. Towering pillars made of tongues. Children with sealed mouths crawling through honeycomb tunnels. And at the center, a throne of silence, upon which sat a woman with Edda's face, but eyes black as void. The vision shattered her to the floor. The villagers carried her, tended her, but no one tried to explain. They didn't need to. The bell was changing her. And she was changing the bell. In her fever, she muttered truths that she didn't know she knew. Words that hadn't been spoken aloud in centuries. Names of old kings. Curses from long-forsaken cults. Songs with no melody but unbearable gravity. When she awoke, the elder stood beside her, mask removed. He pressed something into her hand. A shard. Of what, she didn't know. Bone, maybe. Stone. It was carved like the spiral. It sang when she held it. Not with pitch, but with pull. It wanted to be joined. Completed. The villagers gathered to send her off. They gave no gifts. No bread, no tools. Only nods. Only weighty stares. She walked on. The bell did not ring for 7 nights. On the 8th, it screamed. Story 5. A Map of Breath. Before the scream faded, the sky broke. Edda fell to her knees in the snow, clutching the bell as if it might anchor her to what remained of reality. The scream hadn't come from her, and yet it echoed in her lungs. Her breath fogged out in unnatural shapes, spires, serpents, spirals, before vanishing as if swallowed by the cold. And above, the stars blinked out one by one, until only the darkness remained. Not night. Not storm. Absence. She staggered to her feet and turned toward where the village had been. It was gone. Not burned. Not abandoned. Gone. Flattened, erased, as though the memory of it had been revoked by something older than time. Only the well remained, a yawning black wound in the earth. No voices rose from it now. Only the smell, salt, ash, and something bitter, like burned bone marrow. She ran. 4 days, she wandered without knowing direction. The land had changed. Rivers bent the wrong way. Trees grew backward. Snow melted in circles that whispered. Even the air had altered. It grew thick when she spoke aloud, resisting words, choking on sound. And always, always, the bell vibrated. At times it seemed to tug her hand toward places she dared not go. A cave of weeping stone, a valley where deer hung from trees like fruit, a lake so still it reflected not the sky, but something deeper. She resisted. Mostly. Until the map arrived. She found it wrapped around a dead hare, impaled on a branch. The parchment was soaked in blood, yet not damaged. Its ink shimmered, not with pigment, but motion, a writing that slithered just out of comprehension. She unrolled it under moonlight. There were no roads. No rivers. Only breaths. Each exhalation she had taken in the past 7 days was marked. Notated. Traced. She saw her terror etched in curls. her sorrow in trembled lines, her hope in faint dots, and at the center, a spiral, thorned, twisted, the same shape from the elder's chamber. She followed it. The path led through silence. Not the absence of sound. She had grown used to that. This was worse. This was the suppression of potential. Birds opened beaks but did not caw. Branches snapped without report. Even her heartbeat dulled, like a drum dipped in oil. She began to forget things. Names. Faces. Her own voice. To remember, she carved symbols into her arm. They didn't hurt. She reached a tower not listed on any chart. It wasn't built. It had grown. Veins of basalt and quartz coiled upward in a corkscrew. No door. Only a hollow, vertical tunnel, humming. The bell pulsed. She climbed. Inside, the walls bore mouths. Dozens. Some small as coins, others large as wagon wheels. None moved. But each exhaled a steady breath. Together, they created wind, upward, ceaseless, thick with whispers. She inhaled once, gagged, then tried again. Her lungs filled with stories. Not her own. A girl buried alive for speaking truth. A monk who cut out his eyes to see better. A mother who taught her baby silence by drowning it. The tower stored them all. Compressed. Distilled. It was not a monument. It was a library. At the top, she found the map again. Only now, it was larger. It covered the floor. Each breath she had taken was now mirrored by another. A second set of lungs. A second journey. She wasn't alone. A voice, soft as featherfall, said her name. Not the forest. Not the bell. This was different. Edda. She turned. A woman stood behind her. Cloaked in shadow. Eyes hidden. Hands gloved. You carry its echo. But you are not the first. Edda said nothing. Do you know what the spiral means? Edda shook her head. It is not a symbol. It is a sentence. The woman stepped closer. Removed her gloves. Her fingers bore the same carvings Edda had etched into herself. It means you are heard. And it means you will never speak freely again. Edda took a step back. Who are you? The woman tilted her head. I am the echo that escaped. She reached forward, placed a finger on Edda's forehead. The bell rang. And Edda remembered. The first night. The scream in the field. The hidden chapel. Her sister's voice. The bargain she made without words. The price. The silence. She fell to her knees. The woman leaned close. Whispered. You have mapped your breath. Now map your scream. She vanished. The tower cracked. And below, the mouths began to move. Story 6. The orchard that dreamed in tongues. The frost hadn't let up in days. It clung to Edda's lashes like guilt and settled in her bones with the weight of unspoken farewells. The shard given to her by the tongueless villagers nestled near her chest, humming now and again with something almost like longing. The bell had stopped screaming, but in its silence came a new threat, the expectation that it would, eventually, scream again. She walked east, guided not by the stars or the sun, for the sky remained a thick blanket of ash-colored cloud, but by the rhythm of her breath. 3 counts in, hold. 2 counts out. It became a chant, a drum, a lifeline. When her mind wandered to the dreams, the hall of tongues, the throne of silence, the child made of teeth, she returned to the rhythm. In, hold, out. The land dipped into a ravine, and there, nestled in its belly like something grown in secret, was an orchard. Trees in perfect rows, leafless but alive. Their branches twitched in the absence of wind. Their trunks bore faces, not carved but grown, knots and ridges forming the illusion of sleeping mouths and closed eyes. The air here was warm, unseasonably so. Edda shed her outer coat, felt sweat bead at her brow. The bell twitched at her side. She entered the orchard at midday and walked until the light changed, though she never saw the sun. The trees watched her. Not metaphorically. The eyes began to open. Just slits at first, then slow blinks. Each step invited more awareness. By the time she reached the heart of the grove, a full circle of sentient trees surrounded her. There, in a hollow marked by stones shaped like tongues, she found the child. He was no older than 10, barefoot, dressed in linen soaked to the knees. His skin was alabaster, his eyes mirrors. He said nothing, but his thoughts arrived in her head as if whispered through the bell. "You brought the shard." She nodded. He pointed to the center stone. She laid the shard atop it, and the earth groaned. The trees began to hum. Not melodically, but like a crowd preparing to speak. The boy stepped back. Roots parted. From the soil rose a figure, a woman, skeletal and shrouded in bark, her lips sealed by cords of vine. In her hands she held a book of flesh. Edda could not move. The bell held her in place. Her knees buckled, but she did not fall. The woman opened the book, revealing pages that pulsed and breathed. Each word etched into them throbbed, bleeding slightly at the edges. "Do you remember her name?" the boy asked, though his lips never moved. "No," Edda whispered. The bell trembled. She was the first to write what should not be read. Now she waits to be rewritten. The woman extended the book. Edda did not want to take it, but her hands betrayed her. The moment her fingers touched the cover, a scream tore through her mind. 1,000 voices. 1,000 regrets. Every lie she'd ever told, every silence she'd ever weaponized, returned to her as nails in her chest. She opened the book. She saw herself as a child, whispering forbidden things to her sister in the dark. She saw her mother burning letters before dawn. She saw her father at the well, holding a tongue that wasn't his. The trees swayed, their mouths opening wider. The orchard began to breathe. The boy took the shard, pressed it into the book spine. It fused with a hiss. The bell let out a low chime. "Now you carry it," he said. The woman dissolved into petals. The book crumbled to ash. The trees closed their eyes. And the boy was gone. Edda stood alone. The grove was still, but the heat remained. Her hands burned with invisible ink. She looked down. New words had etched into her palms. To know is to bind. To speak is to betray. She walked until the orchard was only memory. The bell had not rung again, but it had listened, and it remembered. Story 7. The Library Beneath the Field. By the time Edda reached the field of thistle and frost bloom, the sun had begun to lose its warmth. It sagged in the sky like a candle melting in reverse, fighting to keep its glow above the icy line of the world. She felt it on her skin, how the light now seemed to hesitate before touching her, as if unsure whether she was still of the living. The shard the villagers gave her pulsed with a subtle heat in her pocket. It never grew cold, nor did it remain silent. At night, if she dared stay still long enough, she could hear it humming. Not in melody, but like breath under a closed door, constant, patient, and invasive. It was here that the ground gave way, without warning, and she fell. Not far. A twist of ankle and bruise of hip, nothing worse. But when she blinked away the soil, she saw it, a stairwell carved into the roots of the world, descending into shadow without torch or touch. And yet it glowed. Each step glistened with something not quite moss, not quite fungus. A phosphorescence like ink caught in moonlight. It did not burn. It sang. Below, she found a hall of shelves. Endless and concentric, as if the earth had grown its own archive. Books without titles. Scrolls made of leather not from beast nor bark. She ran a finger along one and it recoiled, coiling inward like a waking snail. Then the whispering began. Not from the walls. Not from her own bell, silent in her grasp. From the texts themselves. Stories spoke themselves aloud, though no mouths moved. Accounts of kings who never died, of queens who ruled without breath, of cities that rose, full-grown, from the corpses of single men. And always, in the margins of every tale, the spiral. Sometimes drawn. Sometimes described in riddles. Once, carved with ink that shimmered like oil in a cut throat. She read for what felt like days. She forgot to eat. Forgot to sleep. Each tale fed her something more vital than flesh. She learned of the Order of the Last Voice, whose monks stitched their lips shut in penance to a god whose only gift was silence. Of the scribe witch, who tattooed truths onto living bodies so the lies of kings could be seen and severed. Of the scream lattice, a mythical machine said to render emotion into stone. When her hands began to bleed from turning pages, the bell rang again. The books heard it. Some hissed. Others folded closed. One burst into ash. And then they came. They did not walk. They slid. Hooded figures with skin like bark, torsos thin and too long, their limbs jointed backwards. They bore no eyes, but their faces leaned toward the bell like moths to flame. They did not attack. Not yet. But they reached for her. One touched her arm, and a rush of language not her own flooded her skull, memories not hers. A boy held underwater by his brother. A woman screaming through childbirth to deliver not a child, but a book. A knife made entirely of screams. Edda ran. The shelves twisted around her. Not in layout, but in nature. Books became bones. Scrolls became limbs. She could no longer tell if she walked on floor or fossil. And then she saw the heart. A literal one. Massive. Suspended above a plinth. Veined with gold and stone. It pulsed in time with her shard. Each beat of it lit the room. Each beat of it echoed the bell. She approached. Slowly. The figures made no move to stop her. One knelt. Another wept a black ichor. The shard in her hand lifted of its own accord, and without asking, it inserted itself into a fissure in the heart. The world did not scream. It exhaled. The bell shattered in her grip. She did not scream. She sang. A note so low it cracked bone. So rich it made the air weep. So final it carved her name into the stone beneath her feet. When she awoke, the library was gone. Only the spiral remained, drawn in frost on the field. And her voice, no longer hers, echoing faintly in every breath of wind. Story 8. The Whispering Vault. Snow had long since ceased to fall. What blanketed the earth now was not fresh nor pure, but something older, denser, and stained with memory. Edda's footsteps no longer disturbed it. They sank and vanished, as if the land had decided she belonged. Her bell was quieter these days, not from weakness, but from attention, like a predator crouched, listening. It no longer simply reacted. It chose. She descended into the vale called Morning Shed, though no one called it that aloud. The name existed only in the dreams of those who wandered near. The villagers here, few as they were, lived in hollowed cliffs and tunnel burrows. their lives carved into the stone like fossils still trying to move. Edda's arrival was not met with fear, nor joy, but something deeper, recognition, perhaps, or the resignation that comes with prophecy fulfilled. They had long expected a woman with a bell. Some claimed to have dreamt her face before they ever saw it. One child, pale-eyed and with fingers too long for her frame, followed Edda everywhere. She never spoke, but she hummed in pulses, as if echoing the rhythm of the bell in Edda's grip. The vault itself lay hidden beneath the chapel of severed hymns, a ruin built atop ruins older still. The chapel was not built to praise, but to contain. The stained glass showed no saints, no saviors, only mouths locked behind chains and ears sealed with wax. Sound was sin here. Silence, salvation. Yet the vault whispered. It began as a pressure in the skull. Then a breeze that smelled of burnt feathers and copper. Then came the voices, soft, uncertain, many. They spoke not to Edda, but through her. She became a vessel for their grief, their warnings, their fury. Her sleep turned to convulsions. Her hands scribbled sigils even while her mind was elsewhere. The bell began to vibrate uncontrollably, not ringing, but snarling. The villagers grew restless. Some fled. Others lit ritual fires. The child, the humming girl, began to draw the vault symbol in ash on every wall. The spiral thorn, again and again. The vault itself was not made of stone, but bone. Rib cages fused into archways. Skulls with jawbones removed, so they could never speak. And at the center, a pool, black, motionless, reflective. Not of the room, but of something else. Another world. Or another self. When Edda stepped near, the pool boiled. Not with heat, but reaction. The bell rang 3 notes, sorrow, betrayal, hunger. And the reflection changed. It was her, but clothed in rot, eyes blind, mouth sewn shut with silver thread. She reached for Edda, not to harm, but to plead. Then the girl screamed. Not from fear, but release. The sound cracked the chapel's dome. The vault shuddered. From the pool rose a form, not whole, not alive, but familiar. It wore the face of Edda's mother, and the voice of her forgotten lover. It spoke in a chorus, not of words, but of need. It wanted the bell. No, not the bell. It wanted what was within it. Edda refused. The vault retaliated. Screams filled the chamber, disembodied but sentient. They clawed at her mind, offered bargains, memories, absolution. Edda held firm. She cast the shard, the spiral fragment from the village of hollow tongues, into the pool. It sank without ripple. But the effect was immediate. The vault began to collapse. Stone groaned like wounded beasts. The bone arches splintered. The reflection shattered into dozens of false worlds. Edda grabbed the girl and fled, dodging falling teeth and the grasping limbs of echoes unleashed. They barely escaped. The chapel crumbled behind them, reduced to a mouth filled with broken prayers. But the bell had changed again. Now it rang without sound, not silence, but negation. A presence that erased noise, memory, self. Edda feared to use it, even to touch it. The girl stayed silent, but she no longer hummed. Her eyes were older now. She had seen the vault, and something in it had seen her back. Edda knew this wasn't the end. The vault had been one of many. And her journey, like the bell's purpose, was far from finished. The snow returned that night, red as rust. And with it came footprints that did not belong to her. Story 9. The Smiling Choir. The rain came not as a warning, but as an invitation. It was warm and sticky, unlike the crisp biting snow of the northern hollows Edda had just left behind. This rain tasted of copper. It fell in sheets over the dense forest that clawed its way across the southern borders of the known lands, blanketing the trees in a whispering mist that never cleared. Birds did not sing here. Nothing chirped. Nothing croaked. But deep within the fog, voices hummed. Not words. Harmonies. A melody without source or structure, drifting like smoke through the twisted trunks of trees too ancient to remember their own names. Edda stepped beneath the dripping canopy, the bell silent at her side. She carried with her the shard given by the tongueless villagers and the burden of a vision she could no longer pretend was just dream. The woman with her face. The throne of silence. The choir of the unborn. She followed the sound. The deeper she wandered, the more the forest changed. Roots twisted like veins above the earth, pulsing faintly with sap the color of dried blood. Mushrooms bloomed in patterns, spirals and sigils that vibrated gently beneath her boots. The very air began to shimmer, as if refracting through some unseen veil. And then she saw them. They stood between the trees, barefoot and robed in red silk that glistened despite the damp. Their faces were tilted skyward, mouths open wide, too wide, and from them came the humming. It filled the air like fog, thick and inescapable. It pulled at her bones. None of them had eyes. She tried to speak, but the moment her lips parted, pain lanced through her skull. The bell flared in her hand with a dull throb. A warning. A woman stepped forward from the line of singers. Her robe was white. Her mouth was stitched shut. But in her hands she held a mask, delicate, carved from bone, painted with a serene smile. Edda understood without words. She took the mask, placed it over her face. The moment it settled, the pain eased. She became part of the choir. Not in song, she made no sound, but in presence. They moved as one, weaving between the trees, their dance an old one, a sacred one. With every step, the forest pulsed. She was led to a clearing where the earth dipped into a natural amphitheater, overgrown and ancient. At its center stood a stone altar. On it, a child. Unmoving. Eyes closed. Breath shallow. Around the altar, the choir gathered. They swayed. They hummed. And slowly, the child began to change. Its limbs elongated. Its skin darkened. Its mouth widened. Edda felt the shard pulse in her pack. She knew, without knowing how, that this was a place of transformation, of choice. The choir sang the world into shape, not with words, but with intent, with vibration. One wrong note, and the child would become something else entirely. The woman in white turned to her. She held out a second shard, larger than the first, carved not with spirals, but with jagged intersecting lines that seemed to crawl when unobserved. Edda reached for it, but the bell screamed. The world fractured. She was no longer in the forest. She stood beneath an impossible sky, beneath stars that formed mouths, not constellations. The ground beneath her was glass. Her reflection did not mimic her movements. It spoke. You are the echo. The void remembers. Then silence. And she was back in the forest. The choir was gone. The altar was bare. Only the mask remained. She took it, and walked on. Story 10. The Ink That Burned. They found the monastery by smell. Not of rot, not of ash, but ink. Heavy, metallic ink that stung the nostrils like scorched parchment. The pages of centuries had been set ablaze, yet the ink endured. Not a single flame was visible, yet the scent trailed for miles, winding like a ghost through frozen woodland. Edda's cloak was tattered, her boots chewed by rock and bramble. The bell no longer dangled quietly at her side, but pulsed against her chest like a second heart. Since the choir, since the rupture of song that left trees bleeding sap from their bark and birds dropping from midair, she had not spoken. She feared what her voice might summon now. The monastery stood atop a jagged bluff, its towers crooked, leaning like old men hunched in whispered counsel. Its windows were sealed by books, dozens, hundreds, bound shut and nailed across the stone openings as if to keep the inside from seeing out. No monks greeted her, but the doors opened. She stepped inside and was swallowed by ink. Not liquid, not stains. Air itself, black, heavy, breathing like something alive. The hallways wound in impossible angles. She turned right and found herself descending. Turned left and was climbing. Always she passed shelves. Towering libraries that rose into shadow, books chained shut, others open but blank. The first monk she saw was made of paper. At least, that's what it seemed. Skin papery thin, eyes like ink drops floating in white. He did not speak but bowed, then turned and drifted down a corridor without waiting. She followed. Her footsteps made no sound. They reached a chamber shaped like a bell. The monk pointed to the walls. They were covered in writing. Not letters, not runes, but movement. Language etched in motion. Gestures captured in ink, like choreography pressed into vellum. She stared until her eyes throbbed. She began to understand. This place was not a library. It was a prison. The words were inmates. And the monks? Jailers. The monk took her to a pedestal where a book waited. Black leather. No title. No lock. Just presence. Her bell began to ring, not aloud, but in her bones. She touched the book. It opened. She saw herself. Not in story, in memory. The book bled her past, page by page. Her sister's laughter. The sickness. The burial. The bell. The glade. Every word she'd never said spilled from the pages in ink that hissed like fire. And then, the future. A name. Her name. Inverted. Edda. Written backward. ADD. It meant nothing. And everything. The monk flinched. He knelt and offered her a quill. Write, he signed. If you do not, it will write itself. She dipped the quill. The ink was blood-warm. The bell throbbed. The page pulsed. She wrote. One line. Only one. I do not forgive. The book snapped shut. Her hand burned. A symbol now marked her palm, one half of the spiral. The monk bowed deeper. He turned and, with shaking hands, opened a narrow door hidden behind the shelves. Beyond, a staircase carved in ribs. She descended. The ink followed. Below, in the dark, voices whispered. Not to her. To the ink. And it listened. She did not look back. She would not be written. Not yet. Story 11. The Choir Beneath the Earth. There were no stars that night. Not even the pale sliver of moon dared show its face above the shrouded hills. Only clouds thick with morning, and the hush that preceded something terrible. Edda felt it before she saw it, a tremor beneath her soles, as though the earth itself breathed too slowly, afraid of making a sound. She had crossed a frozen bridge of ancient stone to reach this place, each step echoing in the chasm below like a nail in a coffin. The bell, now wrapped in layers of cloth, vibrated even through its bindings. It hadn't spoken since the ruins of the tongueless village. But tonight it pulsed with dreadful anticipation. What lay ahead was not marked on any chart, spoken of in any surviving tongue. A valley sunken deep, choked with mist and ringed by iron trees. There were no paths here, only instinct, and the pull of the shard she carried, which now hummed against her chest like a heartbeat out of sync. The ground shifted as she walked. Not crumbled, shifted, like a living thing. The mist thickened. Her eyes watered. Each breath came with the taste of rust and rot. And then, as she crested a low rise, she saw it. A temple, or what remained of one. Black stone, carved with countless mouths. Some screaming, some smiling. All silent. She descended. Slowly. The air grew heavy. Her bell began to ring, softly, as though warning something within of her approach. At the gate, a figure waited. Not cloaked, not hidden. A man, perhaps, or a shell of one. Hollow eyes. Lips sewn shut with silver thread. He held out his hand. She placed the shard into it. He bowed, turned, and walked into the temple. She followed. Inside, darkness was total. But her bell lit the path, a dull red glow from its seams. It cast long shadows on the walls, and those shadows moved not with her, but with the flicker of unseen fires. The descent was long. Spiral. Endless. The further they went, the more the air sang, not with music, but with memory. Echoes of birth cries. Death rattles. Lovers' whispers. Screams of sacrifice. All braided into a single, unbearable harmony. They reached a chamber. Vast. Domed. In its center, a pit. Not of fire, but of voices. Invisible, but thick. Tangible. Like water you could drown in. Around the rim stood others. Dozens. Maybe more. Mouths sewn. Eyes shut. Hands outstretched. The guide turned to her, removed his threads. His lips bled. But he smiled. "You brought the bell," he rasped. The first voice she'd heard in weeks. "What is this place?" she asked. "The choir beneath the earth." He gestured to the pit. "Here, the voices of the forgotten are kept. The silenced. The censored. The buried. You carry their key." He took the bell. Unwrapped it. Raised it high. It did not ring. "It must be awakened," he said. "By song." The others began to hum. No words. No melody. Just vibration. The pit answered. A deep, guttural resonance that rattled bone. The man joined. Then Edda. The bell cracked. From its split emerged a mist, no, a shape. Feminine. Familiar. Her sister. Not as she was, but as she'd become in dreams. Burned and beautiful. Laughing backward. Eyes full of stars. "Edda," the shape said, "you have come far. But you do not know why." Tears blurred her vision. "I came for you." The shape smiled. "No. You came for what I guard." It gestured to the pit. The first name. The one that birthed all language. Buried to keep silence sacred. Now it stirs. The choir fell silent. The air thickened. "You must choose," her sister said. "Speak the name and awaken the world. Or keep silent and let it sleep." The bell rose between them, unheld. "But know this," her sister whispered. "Once the name is spoken, silence dies. Forever." Edda looked at the pit. Then the choir. Then the bell. And she. Story 12. The Hollow Feast. In the mountains where the sky knelt low and breathed frost across stone teeth, Edda wandered into a canyon shaped like a scream. The walls curled inward, gouged by time and winds that carried no echo. It was the first place she had found where the bell refused to ring. It shivered, yes, ever since the sun vanished behind jagged ridges, but the chime never came. as though the air here swallowed sound whole. She came upon a village built of bones and canvas, strung like an afterthought along the edge of a frozen river. They were expecting her, not with joy or relief, but dread. Children clung to mothers. Old men muttered beneath breath, not daring to speak openly. The elder did not greet her, but instead placed a black veil over her head and ushered her into the feast hall, where no fire warmed the stone. The walls inside were covered in faces, not paintings, not carvings. Faces. Masks molded from ash and blood, each one bearing different expressions: terror, ecstasy, sorrow. They lined the walls like judges awaiting testimony. In the center of the room, a table was set, not with food, but with offerings: dried thorns, broken instruments, candles that had never been lit. And in the seat at the head of the table, a corpse. It had been there a long time, yet it did not decay. Its mouth was sewn shut with iron wire, its hands crossed over a bell just like Edda's. And though its skin was parchment dry, its chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. The villagers bowed to it. Edda was given a seat. She did not eat, for there was nothing to consume. Instead, she was told she must listen. One by one, villagers stepped forward, placing fingers against the corpse's lips, then whispering into Edda's ear. The things they said did not make sense: half-memories, broken confessions, riddles that rhymed with pain. Each time a new voice reached her, the bell at her side grew warmer. Then came the girl. She was no older than 10, but her eyes were hollow with knowledge. She approached the corpse, hesitated, then placed her ear to its mouth. She listened for far too long. When she turned to Edda, her face had changed. It bore the expression of one of the masks, a mask of wonder and horror intermingled. She did not speak, but simply held out a tongue. Not hers. Old, gray, tattooed with a spiral. The hall went still. The elder rose at last. He moved to the corpse and removed the bell from its hands. It did not resist. It only exhaled. With trembling reverence, the elder gave the bell to Edda. Now she held two. The moment she touched it, the feast began. Not with food, with sound. The bells rang in harmony, and the masks on the walls wept black tar. The villagers chanted without voices, mouths agape but no words emerging. The corpse at the table opened its eyes, which bled light. And Edda saw. She saw herself inside a labyrinth of mirrors, each one showing a different version of her. In one, she was a queen on a throne of crows. In another, she was impaled upon a tree that sang her name. In yet another, she was not human at all, but a wisp of fog that whispered stories into sleeping ears. The visions collapsed. Edda fell backward, both bells screaming. When she awoke, the village was empty. The masks were gone. The corpse had vanished. Only the table remained, and upon it a single note: "Feast well, daughter of silence. The hunger follows." And so she left, the twin bells now bound at her waist. The snow no longer hissed beneath her. It sang. Story 13, Thorns upon the Vein. The forest here did not breathe. It waited. Every limb of pine and ash hung motionless in a perpetual stillness, as if afraid to creak. Edda's every footstep, no matter how cautious, echoed as if she were walking on a cathedral floor, not frozen earth. And though her bell no longer screamed, it pulsed now, heavy with weight not its own. It seemed to anticipate something. Perhaps it feared. The village behind her had dissolved like a dream. No roads had led her forward, only instinct, only the subtle pull of the shard in her pocket, the one carved with the spiral thorn that sang in the language of pressure, not sound. Edda did not know why she followed, only that to remain still would be worse. The trees grew denser until the sky itself vanished. In the dark, the shadows moved with independence. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of figures in the distance, not people, but outlines, cloaked in bramble, crawling sideways along the trunks, whispering in sounds only the bell heard. And it answered, now and then, with a shiver. The hollow ahead was not natural. It was too round, too precise, and ringed with stones carved in runes too jagged to be benign. At its center stood a monument, a stone heart bound in thorned iron, suspended by sinews that might have once been roots, but now resembled veins. She approached because there was nothing else to do. Her legs moved like they belonged to someone else. The bell clattered against her chest, its rhythm erratic, panicked. The spiral shard in her pocket grew warm. When she touched the stone heart, it opened. Not physically, but inside her, something parted. A flood of memory that was not hers. A woman, long dead, screaming into a room of monks with no ears. A child birthed without eyes, held up to a mirror that cracked. A king who cut out his tongue to silence prophecy, only to have his silence echoed forever in stone. It was a library of suffering. And Edda was now a reader. 4 days, perhaps weeks, she wandered the hollow, though she never moved. Each thought spiraled into another, each memory opened into 1,000 more, each whisper led her deeper into a maze of loss, betrayal, sacrifice. The silence was overwhelming. Not peace, absence. And absence, she learned, could be a predator. She met another. Not human, but something shaped like one. It wore no face and walked without disturbing the ground. It did not speak, but in its presence the bell throbbed until Edda bled from her gums. It handed her something, a second shard. This one colder, shaped like a jagged mouth. As soon as she took it, the faceless thing dissolved into dust. Or was it memory? Edda ran. She had not known she could still move. The trees opened again. The sky returned. The bell fell silent. But inside her, something screamed. Not with voice. With hunger. She found an abandoned abbey. It leaned sideways into a cliff, half collapsed, its walls weeping rust. There, in the altar, she found writing. The same spiral thorn sigil, over and over, etched with obsessive hands. A warning, perhaps. Or a prayer. Or a cage. The second shard vibrated violently. The first pulsed in answer. She pressed them together. The world tore. Just for a moment. A crack of reality, a glimpse of a throne of roots, a scream that could not have come from a human throat. And silence returned. When she awoke, she was no longer in the abbey. She was underground. Surrounded by faces. Not people, just faces. Carved. Preserved. Mummified. Watching. All of them wore her expression. The bell lay at her side. Split down the middle. The shards in her hand, now fused into one, pulsed with a rhythm she recognized. It was her heartbeat. But something else beat with it. She stood, and followed the spiral once more. Story 14. The Echoing Skin. The wind had a new voice tonight, one that sang through the rags of trees like a thread pulled too tight. Edda did not speak. She hadn't for days. Not since the moment the bell cracked for the first time. A hairline fracture, almost imperceptible to the eye, but felt deeply by the hand. It throbbed with each breath she took, resonated inside her chest like it belonged there. Like it had always been there. The ground here was no longer frozen. It had turned slick and steaming with rot, the snow replaced by black soil that clung to her boots with greedy fingers. The world around her had become hushed in a way that no longer seemed natural. Not sacred, not reverent, just absent. Even the birds had abandoned the sky. Edda walked beneath a canopy of hollow branches, and the bell whispered to her in tones that had stopped being words. She had not expected the monastery to be whole. The map etched into the shard the villagers had given her was crude, but unmistakable. It lay nestled between cliffs like a wound had been carved from stone just to hold it. Time had not claimed the structure, but something else had. Something meticulous. Where once must have been towers now stood sharpened spires of bone. Where bells once rang in chorus now hung strings of silent tongues, grey and long dead. They met her at the gate. Figures robed not in cloth, but in stitched skins, pale and veined, looped with sigils drawn in old blood. They did not ask her name. They knew. They spoke not with voices, but with a tremor in her mind, a language of pressure and intent. She bears the cracked bell. She brings the memory of silence. She has swallowed the scream. They bowed, and the gates opened. Inside, the halls smelled of ink and fear. The monks walked barefoot, their feet smeared with charcoal, leaving stories on the stones. Each step a sentence. Each breath a punctuation mark. She followed them down corridors lined with parchments made from unknown flesh, written in a language she both did and did not understand. The bell hummed low, vibrating against her ribs. They showed her the heart of the monastery, a room with no ceiling, where the sky bled stars even in the day. In the center stood a table, and upon it a mirror. But not a mirror for light. It reflected sound. She saw echoes of her own past, her mother's lullabies, the scream of the priest she had killed in the first dream, the breath of the faceless man as he etched symbols into her sleeping skin. And then she saw her future. Her mouth sewn shut. Her body a conduit. Her eyes twin voids. Her voice a relic no longer hers. She recoiled, and the monks wept. Not aloud. Through their blood. Red tears poured from their closed eyelids as they fell to their knees. One took her hand, placed it on the mirror, and mouthed a single word, "Choose." The bell cracked again. The mirror shattered. Not like glass, like bone. Splinters of sound pierced her skin. She screamed, and in doing so, unmade the silence they had preserved. The monastery shook. Books combusted. The sky wept fire. The monks chanted now, their mouths bleeding open, voices forced from throats that hadn't spoken in decades. They sang her name backward and forward, layered over hymns from the old tongue, until her knees buckled. She stood. The bell levitated. Then fell. It broke. Fully. Into 3 perfect pieces. From each piece poured a vapor. One black, one red, one silver. The monks inhaled it. Collapsed. Smiling. Dead. Edda walked alone now. With nothing in her hands but the shard, the scar, and the memory of sound so profound it left her deaf in one ear. She walked north. Always north. Toward the next ruin. Toward the voice calling her from under the ice. Story 15. The Choir of Ashes. No one remembered how the choir had started. Some said the voices rose from the cinders of a ruined convent. Others whispered that the ash sang first, and the throats came later. All Edda knew was that the land burned, and in its wake harmony lingered. Not the harmony of peace, but the kind that made your teeth ache, the kind that filled your mouth with dust. She had come south now, beyond the frost line, where green fields once grew fat with wheat and blood. Now the earth was gray, choked with soot. Trees stood like sentinels stripped bare and starved. Villages were nothing but outlines of stone, ghosted in charcoal. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a dome. It was neither ruin nor temple. Not a castle, not a grave. It pulsed, though, faintly. like breath through lungs long dead. The bell at her side did not ring here. It trembled, like it feared waking something. When Edda approached the dome, she was not alone. Shadows moved ahead of her, slow and stooped. Hooded figures in robes made of stitched feathers, ashes clinging to their hems. They did not speak. They hummed. Not with mouths. Not even with their throats. The sound came from their ribs, deep inside. A droning resonance that vibrated the air but never quite became a note. The closer she came, the more her own bones felt brittle, as if she too might sing herself apart. Inside the dome was not light. It was density. The air was thick, thick with memory, thick with mourning. On the walls were lines of soot arranged in script too old to name. It slithered rather than stood still. The robed ones formed a circle around a pit in the center. From the pit rose smoke, not upward, but outward. Horizontal, like limbs reaching. They parted as Edda stepped forward, and she saw what lay within. Tongues. Thousands. Grayed, shriveled, arranged in spirals. The choir of ashes. The eldest of the robed ones stepped forward. His mask was made of soot and lacquer, smooth but cracked, the face of someone who once knew laughter but forgot how to use it. He did not greet her. He bowed and placed a stone bowl at her feet. She looked inside. Teeth. Her own. Milk teeth she'd lost as a child. They rattled without touch, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. "Why do you have these?" she asked. The answer came not in words but memory. The bell pulsed. Her mind fell inward. A bed of fire. Her mother above, singing. Soldiers at the door. A decision. A scream not heard but felt. Her mother tearing something from her mouth, the last of her silence, and giving it to the flame. Edda woke on the dome's floor, blood at her nose. The choir still hummed. The robed ones stood unmoved. The eldest gestured. Down. Into the pit. She obeyed. The air thickened. Her ears bled anew. But the bell warmed. It guided her. Below was not fire but void. A room with no walls and yet pressure from every direction. At its center, an altar made of ash. Upon it, a scroll. She reached. The ash flared, and the scroll unfurled itself. Words burned into her eyes. Not just read, but seared. She saw her name in a tongue not spoken for millennia. She saw the path forward, not in maps, but in blood. And she saw what must be lost next. The bell. She looked down at it. It had grown darker, heavier. Its hum was a growl now. The scroll pulsed. Sacrifice. She placed the bell on the altar. The moment it left her fingers, the world screamed. Not sound, meaning. The choir above shattered into dust. The dome cracked, and from the ash rose something neither dead nor living. It wore her face. It called her by name, and it spoke. The silence must end. Edda fled the collapsing dome with nothing but the scroll in hand and blood in her mouth. The bell was gone, but not silent. It rang still inside her. Story 16. The Songless Bell. When the thaw came, it came not with warmth, but with silence. A cruel silence, not of peace, but of expectation, the kind that wrapped itself around your chest and held your breath in its palm. Edda crossed the final ridge into the Vale of Vathros with her cloak heavy from frost and her hands numb to the bone. Below her, the valley looked dead. Not quiet. Not still. Dead. The bell, now darker than iron and etched with faint, shifting runes, pulsed faintly at her hip. It had stopped ringing weeks ago, as if offended by her last passage through the mouthless forest. as if it mourned something she couldn't name. It had changed since then. So had she. The first steps down into the vale were slick, the snow giving way to mud that clung to her boots like grief. The village, if it could still be called that, was not marked by smoke or sound, but by the twisted remains of sound itself. Trees bent not from wind, but as though something had whispered too close to them and they'd recoiled. Doors hung open on hinges that moaned not in rust, but in warning. She passed homes filled with people who stared but did not blink. Children sat unmoving in corners. An old woman wept into a bowl of ash. None spoke. None dared. It was said that once in Vathros a song had been sung so pure it drew the sky closer. And then it had shattered. The elder was not in the hall. The hall was not a hall any more. Just timbers collapsed inward, as if something vast and invisible had leaned in to listen and forgotten to lean back. Instead, Edda found the new elder by following the flies. He was in a barn, writing with ink made of soot and spit on sheets of skin. When he looked up, his eyes were milk-white, but she felt him see her anyway. He did not smile. He did not nod. He simply extended a hand, trembling, to the bell. She placed it in his palm. He shrieked, not in pain, not in fear, in release. The sound that tore from his mouth had no shape, no pitch. It was like hearing a color or seeing a scream. Edda fell to her knees. The barn cracked. The sky outside dimmed. And then he stopped. He gave the bell back. It no longer pulsed. It no longer felt warm. It was mute. The elder turned his back on her and pointed toward the mountain beyond the valley. "It waits," he rasped, voice like snapped roots, "where silence is oldest." That night she did not sleep. She sat by a frozen pond where fish still swam in aimless spirals beneath the ice. She watched her reflection blur and sharpen with the wind. Behind her, the villagers began to gather. They came with instruments. Harps missing strings. Flutes filled with wax. Drums whose skins had been torn. They sat in a wide circle around her and placed the broken things in front of them. And then they waited. She did not know what was expected. So she did what the bell once did. She listened. And from the silence she heard them. Not their voices, but their intentions. Mourning. Memory. Hope. A girl, no older than 10, reached forward and touched her harp's frame. The wood hummed. Just once. Then it cracked in half. That was the signal. The others followed. They broke their instruments, one by one, with reverence. With finality. Edda wept without knowing why. When it was done, they all stood. And they bowed. She left the next morning, carrying the bell that no longer sang, and a fragment of harp wood tucked inside her cloak. The path to the mountain was jagged, climbing not just in height, but in weight. Every step pulled at her as if gravity itself resented her ascent. Halfway up, the wind began to speak. It didn't use words. It used absence. When she stepped left, a warmth would vanish. When she stepped right, a thought would scatter. She had to move not toward the peak, but toward herself. At the summit was a spire of black ice, impossibly tall, impossibly thin. And at its base, a door. Not built, grown. Wound from silence itself. She touched it, and the bell at her side fell to dust. She stepped inside. What she found was not a room. It was a memory, preserved in stillness. The moment the song of Vathros shattered the sky, frozen, looping, eternal. She saw the choir. She saw the conductor. She saw herself, older, mouth open in a scream that would never end. And in the center, a child. The same one from the bone glade. the same one from her fever dreams, the same one from before. It turned to her, and spoke, not in sound, in truth. She fell, not physically. Herself, her sense, her name, all fell away. What stood up was not Edda, not entirely. The mountain did not crumble. It inhaled. And below, in Vathros, for the first time in centuries, a bird sang. Story 17. The Choir of Cinders. The mountain had taken her name. The valley below whispered not Edda, but something older, something without shape. When she descended, it was not to return. It was to dissolve. Those who saw her from afar that morning claimed she glowed faintly, as if she carried the dawn beneath her skin. Others insisted she left no footprints. The village of Vathros did not greet her with fanfare, only breathless reverence. The mute elder knelt, touched his brow to the earth, and then scattered a pinch of ash into the wind. That wind did not carry it far. It danced around Edda, as if recognizing its origin. She did not speak, could not. What language does a soul wear when it has no name? In her arms she carried the fragment of black ice from the summit, a shard of the grown door that had unmade the bell. It pulsed gently, not with sound, but with tension, a knot yearning to be unraveled. That night she placed it in the center of the broken hall where once sat the elders of song. The villagers gathered around it. None dared touch it. Then came the fire, not of flame, but of memory. As the shard warmed, visions spilled outward, of ancient choirs singing beneath moons that no longer existed, of kings born mute to protect them from prophesied madness, of cities built on syllables too heavy to speak. The villagers wept. Some bled from the ears. Others laughed until they collapsed. The shard had begun to sing, but only to her. In her mind, in a register just beyond comprehension, it hummed the names of the fallen. Every name she'd never known she'd forgotten. Her mother, who died screaming into the hearth. Her brother, swallowed by the silent plague. The twin sister who had once whispered promises into her ear before vanishing into the river. The villagers began to change. Slowly, subtly. Some grew pale as chalk. Others wept tears of dust. A few began to echo her movements unconsciously. When she turned, they turned. When she blinked, they blinked. She was no longer merely Edda. She was becoming something else. A tuning fork for reality. A mouthpiece for stillness. The elder came to her on the seventh night. His eyes were gone now. Not plucked, not burned. Simply absent. He placed his hand on the shard, and it stopped humming. It must be carried, he rasped. North, to the choir of cinders. She did not ask where. She already knew. The name alone painted itself across the inside of her skull like soot and scripture. She left at dawn. Alone. The villagers watched but did not follow. They were not meant to. The road north was not marked by stone or tree. It was a scar across the world, visible only to those who had heard the right silences. Her feet found it as if recalled by instinct. On the third day the world turned black. Not night. Black. As if light itself had been forgotten. She walked by feel, trusting the shard's pulse. Her hands blistered. Her ears bled. Her thoughts repeated. The choir waits. The choir watches. The choir remembers. She reached them on the 12th day. They were not human. Not any more. Once, perhaps. But now they stood tall and thin, like trees carved from shadow, mouths sewn shut with threads of light. Each stood before a pyre that did not burn, but inhaled. Their robes fluttered not from wind, but from memory. She stepped into their circle. The shard in her hands began to melt. One of the choir stepped forward, unthreaded its mouth, and spoke. Sing. But Edda had no song, only silence. So she opened her mouth and let it spill. The sound that came was not hers. It was every cry that had ever been swallowed, every name that had gone unscreamed, every lullaby aborted by death. It shook the choir. It shook the pyres. It cracked the sky. And then it ended. She fell to her knees. The shard was gone. The choir burned. But they did not scream. They sang. Their mouths moved, their lungs remembered, their tongues awoke. For the first time in centuries, the choir of cinders sang a requiem not of warning, but of welcome. Edda was lifted, not by hands, but by resonance, and carried upward, into the smoke, into the story yet untold. Story 18. The Bells That Hung Backwards. The road that led down the other side of the mountain did not exist on any map, parchment, or even memory. It was made not of stone or dirt, but of recollection. Each step Edda took summoned the shape of the path, as if the world itself had to remember how to let her pass. Behind her, the spire of black ice stood unshaken, a needle of silence threading sky to snow. She had no bell any more, only dust. But dust, she had learned, still remembers its shape. When the wind blew hard enough, the grains lifted off her cloak and spiraled into patterns her eyes couldn't catch, but her bones recognized. The patterns whispered to her through aching joints and shallow breath. They said, "Not yet." They said, "Deeper still." The veil of Vathros shrank beneath her, now distant, now echoless. Her boots struck a trail through frost-rimed moss, and every step reminded her that this part of the world did not abide trespass. Here the silence did not wait. It hunted. She first noticed it in the trees. Each had grown with its branches reversed, roots tangled in the air, bark curling inwards as though trying to contain something. Their shadows moved ahead of them, not behind. Birds perched upside down and sang notes that collapsed into themselves, leaving no echo. The forest was wrong, but not unfamiliar. She remembered a lullaby, one her mother never sang, only mouthed in nightmares. It had no words, only breath, and this forest breathed in that rhythm. It was there she met the boy. He stood in the hollow of a tree that beat like a heart. No older than 12, with eyes too wide and too knowing. He did not speak. Instead, he raised his hand, and in his palm floated a shard of obsidian that wept light. She approached, not with caution, but with reverence. Something about him suggested not threat, but consequence. When she reached for the shard, he let it fall. It did not hit the ground. It sang. A high, terrible note, like a scream trapped beneath glass. The trees recoiled. The boy smiled. And then he vanished. The shard hovered where he left it. Edda took it. At once, memory poured into her skull like smoke. The choir, the elder, the girl with the harp, the mountain, the truth that was not sound. And then something new, a bell tower that rang backwards, its chimes pulling time instead of marking it. It was said, in the old stories, that some bells were not forged but born, not to be heard, but to be obeyed. And one such tower still stood, buried under the lake of tears at the edge of the dead marshes. She turned east. The dead marshes did not welcome her. Their fog curled like hands, reaching not for her body, but her name. She held it tight inside her teeth and spat only silence in return. Around her, the water never moved. Flies hovered in frozen clouds. Corpses lined the shallows, each with coins stitched into their cheeks instead of eyes. She found the tower by sound. or rather by its absence. In the middle of the lake, the fog folded around a shape so complete it repelled all thought. There were no birds, no wind, not even her heartbeat. Crossing the lake was not walking, but forgetting. Each step cost her something. Her father's voice, the smell of home, the weight of her brother's hand. By the time she reached the steps of the bell tower, she had forgotten what pain was. The doors opened inward. No hinges, no welcome, just space making room for inevitability. Inside, the air was thicker than stone. The walls bent slightly toward her, as if listening. And at the center, hanging upside down from an invisible chain, was the bell of regression. Blacker than night, larger than a cart, its mouth faced upward, and from within it came the steady drip of memory. 1 drop. 2. Each drop struck the floor and became a moment. One showed her as a child, burying a bird. Another, weeping in a doorway as a storm swallowed a figure she couldn't name. The bell did not ring. It took. When she approached, her shadow ran backward up the walls. The bell shimmered. From within, a voice emerged, not in words, but in questions. Questions only she could hear. Only she could answer. Who are you without grief? What would you be if no one remembered you? Would you still choose silence if you knew what it cost? Edda stood very still. Then she reached inside the bell. The moment her fingers crossed the threshold, she felt her timeline shatter. Every choice she had made splintered outward in waves. She saw herself marry. She saw herself kill. She saw herself die as a mother, a tyrant, a shadow, a child. All of them screaming the same word, listen. She did. And from within the bell, she pulled not a clapper, not a sound, but a mirror. A mirror that showed not reflection, but purpose. Her hands bled where the glass touched skin. Her eyes bled where her purpose touched truth. She turned from the tower. Behind her, the bell cracked. Just once. Time shuddered. The lake boiled. The fog cleared. And she remembered everything she had lost. The way back was shorter, but harder. Each step forward was like dragging herself from quicksand made of guilt. But she had the shard. She had the mirror. She had, for the first time, direction. The wind changed. Not in direction, but in allegiance. Where once it had pushed her back, now it whispered paths through the trees. She followed, bleeding purpose, leaving prints that sang long after she passed. The boy was waiting at the edge of the wood. Older now. Not by years, but by burdens. He held no shard. No smile. Just a key. She took it without question. And behind her, the bell tower of regression crumbled into silence. Story 19. The Crimson Choir. The morning after the inversion, when the bell in Edda's hand sang backward and silence recoiled like a wounded beast, the world felt peeled. Not just quiet, but raw, as though sound had always been a skin, and now it was gone. Vathros slept uneasily in her memory, and she descended from the mountain without footprints. Snow avoided her. Branches bent away. No one told her where to go next. But direction no longer mattered in the same way. She wasn't walking toward answers. She was walking because something within her had been asked a question, and her footsteps were the only reply it knew how to give. The path turned red before she noticed it. At first, she thought it was dust. Then wine. Then petals. But when she knelt and touched it, it shimmered with heat and smell and something else. Not blood. Something older. Memory ink. The kind that stained you on the inside. She followed it. It led through ruins she didn't remember being built. Arches that looped like broken halos. walls that leaned inward, listening. And in the center, the choir. They weren't singing. They were waiting. 13 of them. Mouths sewn shut with thread made of gold and regret. Their robes bled light. Not bright, but wrong. The kind of light that reminded you what darkness meant. Each held an instrument made of something living, a violin with a bow of braided hair, a horn grown from a child's femur, a drum stitched from the skin behind an ear. Edda stood at the edge of their circle and waited. She didn't speak. Neither did they. Not aloud. But the moment stretched between them until it snapped. And then they began. The first note didn't come from an instrument. It came from her. A breath she didn't mean to exhale. A sound that curved back into her lungs and grew teeth. It hurt. It healed. It changed her. The choir responded. One by one they played. The sound wasn't music. It was memory forced through shape. A language you didn't hear so much as feel breaking your ribs and whispering between your bones. She saw her past, but not as it was. As it meant. Her mother's eyes, turning away. Her father's silence, not absence but protection. The first time she saw the bell, and knew it was hers. Then the choir shifted. They began to circle her, slow at first, then faster. Each step pulled at her skin. Threads of sound looped around her wrists, her ankles, her thoughts. She didn't resist. Resistance was a language she no longer spoke. In the center of their spiral, she became a string. They plucked her, and the world changed. She was in a field. Red grass. Black sky. Stars that blinked like eyelids in pain. A woman stood across from her. Naked, but not vulnerable. Painted in symbols that wept ink. Her face was Edda's. And not. "Why did you follow the bell?" the woman asked. Edda tried to answer, but her mouth gave no sound. "Not to be heard," the woman said, walking closer. "But to listen. Always to listen." She raised a hand. Not in greeting. In judgment. And Edda fell again. This time into fire. Not heat. Judgment. The kind of flame that only burned lies. When she emerged, skinless and whole, the choir knelt. Their threads fell away. Mouths opened. And in unison they sang. Not loudly. But perfectly. It was the song that had shattered Vathros. But this time it ended. Edda didn't clap. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. And turned away. The path ahead was no longer red. It was clear. And steep. She walked. Story 20. The Crimson Choir. The first sound after the song's end was not silence, but the memory of silence. It lingered, haunting the edges of her senses like the ghost of a scream never voiced. Edda stepped forward, leaving behind the circle of the choir. Their heads remained bowed, and she did not look back. Not because of arrogance or coldness, but because she feared she might break if she saw their faces again. She feared she might kneel too. And she was not meant to kneel. The path was clear but unnatural. Grass didn't sway. Stones didn't shift. Air didn't move. As if the world had paused to watch her next step. And yet it was not quiet. The song echoed still, not in sound but in sensation. Like vibrations along her spine. Like the itch of unshed tears. Like thunder in the heart. Ahead, a bridge formed, not built, not placed, but grown. From bone. Each rib curved outward from the mountain's heart, reaching across a canyon so deep it swallowed all light. The bones groaned with memory. With the weight of every traveler who had passed this way and never returned. She walked. At the center of the bridge, the wind returned. It didn't howl, it whispered. But it whispered names. Names she didn't know. Names she did. Names of the forgotten, the lost, the silenced. Names that had no tongue to speak them any more. Her knees buckled, but she pressed on. And then, fire. Not in the sky. In her chest. A heat like realization. A burning that demanded truth. She clutched the bell to her ribs, and it pulsed with warmth. Not comfort, but warning. Across the bridge, the landscape changed. Trees that bled ash. Rivers that reflected not your face, but your fears. The sky pulsed like a wound. And in the center, a city without doors. Vathros, in its second skin. The city was alive, but not in any human sense. Walls that breathed. Streets that shivered. Windows that watched. Edda passed through a gate that wasn't there and was swallowed by shadow. Inside, she heard breathing. Not her own. Not one set of lungs. Thousands. An audience waiting for her voice. But she had none left. Still, she stepped forward. A temple rose from the center of the city, not built, but exhaled by the earth. Its spires were fingers. Its bells were teeth. Its altar was waiting. And he was there. The one who had first shown her the bell. Not in this life. Not in any life. But in the breath between them. He wore silence like armor. His mouth was stitched shut, not by thread, but by guilt. His eyes were older than time. And he knelt, not to her, but to the choice she carried. She raised the bell. He reached for it. And the world tilted. A scream tore the sky, not from pain, but from truth denied too long. The city shuddered. Walls wept blood. Bells shattered. The breath of thousands choked on revelation. Edda dropped the bell. It didn't fall. It rose. Floated. Rang once. And the city exhaled. Not death. Not life. Judgment. She stood alone in the temple. The man was gone. So were the shadows. So were the watchers. But she was not alone. A child stood at the altar. No older than 7. Eyes made of echoes. Skin like candle wax. The child held out a hand. Edda took it, and knew this was not a guide. This was a mirror. The child led her to the bell again, now hovering in silence. It turned to face her. A bell with no clapper. A bell that spoke only when one's soul was ready. She touched it, and saw everything. Not visions. Not memories. Meanings. The root behind every word. The scream behind every silence. The shadow behind every smile. She wept, and the bell rang without sound. The city crumbled, but not in ruin. In release. Stone became sand. Walls became whispers. Ash became light. And when it was done, Edda stood alone in a field. No city. No child. No bell. Just silence. But this time it wasn't empty. It was sacred. And for the first time she smiled. The mountain behind her closed its eyes. And the wind carried her forward. Story 21. The Morning Gate. She walked for hours without seeing the sun. There was no need for light, not any more. Light had become a memory, something ornamental. What guided her now was the rhythm of her breath, the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the unseen thread of fate stitched into her spine and tugging her forward. Behind her, the remnants of Vathros were reduced to myth. She didn't turn back. There was no back. The past had collapsed in on itself, swallowed by its own hunger. All that mattered now was forward. But forward was a place without maps. The land ahead was a scar. Blackened soil. Trees with no bark, only exposed nerves that trembled when she passed. Birds with no wings, only songs that spiraled upward until they burst like glass. The wind carried no scent, but the memory of scent, ashes, salt, roses. The air shimmered, not from heat but from grief. Then she saw it, the morning gate. It rose from the earth like a rib cage cracked open. No walls. No fortifications. Just the gate, as if something sacred had fled and the threshold was all that remained. 2 pillars of bone and onyx, etched with names in a language that bled if you stared too long. A veil of chains draped between them, each link shaped like an ear. It did not open. It did not need to. Edda stepped through, and it allowed her. Beyond the gate, a city in reverse. Buildings sank instead of rose. Streets spiraled downward into echoing gulfs. People walked backward, speaking in sighs. It was not madness. It was grief ritualized into architecture. The city was not dead, but mourning. And they knew her. Every face she passed tilted downward in reverence. No one spoke her name, but every breath said it. Her presence wasn't a surprise. It was fulfillment. The bell had chosen her, and the morning gate had listened. A woman in violet robes approached. Her eyes were sewn shut with threads of twilight. She extended a hand, palm up, and in her voice was dust and lullabies. You remember less than you should, but more than most. Edda nodded. I don't remember my name, because names are a luxury. You have become function. The woman led her into a descending spiral, through an alley where the walls whispered secrets they regretted. At the bottom, a square, an amphitheater made of silence. There they performed. Not plays. Not music. Grief. They sculpted mourning from air. Men danced with the ghosts of those they'd failed. Children recited apologies they didn't understand. Women screamed without sound, and the walls absorbed their anguish like prayer. Edda watched. Then she stepped into the center. No one told her what to do. The ritual was instinct. She raised her hand, and the bell appeared, though she had not summoned it. It hovered, suspended by sorrow alone. A single toll. The amphitheater fell silent. The bell's tone didn't echo. It carved. Through stone. Through bone. Through memory. It peeled away pretense and left only need. Then the soil beneath her feet opened. Not collapsed. Opened. Like a wound admitting truth. She fell, but not downward. Inward. Through layers of memory, time, silence. Through screams never screamed. Through deaths never mourned. She landed on a mirror. It cracked. Reflections spilled. One for every person she'd never known but had always carried. Their faces shimmered across the shards, and in their eyes, forgiveness. She wept, not out of sadness, but relief. The mirror dissolved, and she stood on a bridge of breath. Every step exhaled by those who had once hoped. Ahead, a throne made of listening. No king, no queen, only the act of witness. She approached, kneeling beside the throne, a child. The same child? No, a new one, but with the same eyes. It spoke. You've carried enough. You may put it down. She hesitated. And then what? Then you listen. So she did. She knelt, placed the bell before the throne, closed her eyes, and listened. To every wound, to every silence that had once screamed. And she wept. But this time not alone. The city wept with her. Story 22. Hollow Thrones. The grass where Edda stood was not green. It had never been. Each blade shimmered with a pale translucence, as though grown from memory rather than earth. The sky above no longer wept or burned. It waited. For her. For what she would become. The silence was complete, yet it pressed in around her like thunder held just behind the veil of breath. And then came the sound. Not a whisper, not a cry. The low toll of a bell from nowhere, and everywhere. She turned. A forest loomed where the field had ended. Not a forest of trees, but of pillars. Columns of obsidian, reaching far above, supporting no sky. Between them, mist slithered like thought unfinished. The air tasted of forgotten vows and unwept tears. She stepped forward. The grass did not bend beneath her feet, it fractured. Like glass giving way to something heavier than weight, purpose. Within the forest, the light changed. Not dimmer, deeper. Shadows were no longer absence, but presence. They did not fall away from light, they moved with it. The pillars whispered in voices like cracking ice. They knew her name, but not the one she had carried. The name beneath names. The name she had forgotten even in dreams. She followed the bell. It did not guide her. It judged her. Every step she took was measured. Each breath dissected. The path wound deeper not into distance, but into memory. Her own, and not her own. She saw flashes between the pillars, not visions, but scenes. A knight kneeling before a crown that burned. A child burying a secret under the roots of a screaming tree. A woman singing a lullaby to a corpse that would not stay dead. And then she saw herself. Not as she was now. As she had once been. A girl of fire and fury, standing at a door she never should have opened. She reached for the vision, and it bled away, leaving ash in her palm. The forest opened. At its heart stood a throne, carved of bone and bound in silence. No one sat upon it. But it was not empty. A whisper curled around her, not sound but sensation. Do you remember why you began? Edda fell to her knees. Not in surrender. In mourning. The throne pulsed. Not with life. With hunger. It had not been made. It had been earned. Every ruler who had sat upon it had left something behind. A piece of their voice. A sliver of their soul. A lie they told themselves too often to forget. And now it wanted hers. But she was not here to rule. She stood, and the throne cracked. A scream erupted from its core, splintering the mist. The pillars shook. Light bled from the sky. And from the shadows crawled figures. Not men. Not beasts. Regrets given form. Choices unlived. Futures denied. They came without eyes. Without mouths. They came with hands outstretched, seeking not to harm, but to remember. She did not run. They surrounded her. And in their presence she spoke. Not with her mouth. With her silence. She opened her soul, and the bell within it rang. A note of defiance. Of grief. Of forgiveness. The figures stilled. They bowed. And crumbled into dust. The throne shattered. From its ruin a light rose. Pale. Resolute. It coalesced into a blade, not of steel, but of will. It floated before her, waiting. Not for her to wield it. For her to accept it. She did. The blade whispered truths as she held it. Names of those forgotten. Songs never sung. Promises made in the dark. It did not burn her. It embraced her. Behind her, the forest closed. Ahead, a path of glass stretched across a chasm of stars. Not into the heavens, into the heart of all silence. And she walked toward a city that had never been built, toward a fate that had never been written, toward a truth that would unmake everything. But she did not hesitate, because silence was no longer gold. It was hers, and death, it still lurked. But now it listened. Story 23. The Quiet Harvest. Edda stood at the rim of the valley that shimmered like a mirage. No roads led to it. No birds flew over it. The trees that bordered its curve grew with an eerie stillness, their leaves locked in a perpetual hush. Beyond them, a silence so absolute it pressed against the skin like humidity. This was the field of ebon reeds, a place spoken of only in half-forgotten lullabies and funeral rites. She stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into soil that felt like velvet soaked in secrets. Each blade of the tall black grass bent under her weight without a sound, as if the land refused to echo. And in the distance, far across the field, something pulsed faintly. A heartbeat not her own. A rhythm alien to this stillness. A memory stirred. A warning etched in the margins of an old journal. The harvesters wear no masks, but their faces are not their own. Edda moved deeper, each step drawing her into a story she hadn't lived, but one that had waited for her. Reeds swayed despite the still air, parting to reveal patterns, not random, but deliberate. Glyphs. Spirals. Circles of silence etched into the ground. The language of forgotten gods. She saw them then. Figures cloaked in burlap and dusk, bent low among the reeds. They plucked the silence like one might gather grain, placing it into baskets that hummed. Not sound, not energy, but absence. The harvesters moved with ritualistic precision, and yet none turned to look at her. It was as though she didn't exist, or worse, that she had always existed among them. Edda wanted to speak, to announce herself, to ask. But the valley devoured words before they reached her lips. So she walked, closer to the center, where the heart of the pulse beat steady and strange. The harvesters did not stop her. At the center was a hole. Not dug, but born. An absence not of matter but of meaning. A pit into which everything fell. Time, memory, even grief. She stood at its edge, feeling herself unravel in small, imperceptible ways. The edges of her thoughts frayed. The tight coils of her purpose slackened. Then the child returned. Not the one of echoes and wax from Vathros, but a new presence. A boy of ash and feather, with a voice like rain remembered. He sat cross-legged by the hole, humming a lullaby with no tune. When he saw her, he smiled, not in joy, but in recognition. "You've come to plant," he said. Edda knelt beside him, though she didn't remember deciding to do so. Her hands opened, and there, nestled in her palms, lay seeds she hadn't carried. Tiny bells made of bone, rattling softly in a silence that defied silence. The boy pointed to the edge of the pit. "Here." She planted each one with care. With each burial, the ground hummed. A song formed without sound. A dirge for the forgotten, a requiem for the hushed. The harvesters began to sing then, though their mouths never moved. The sound came from the soil, from the sky, from the breath between heartbeats. And Edda understood, these were not seeds. These were promises. Every silence stolen. Every scream choked. Every word unsaid. She was returning them to the earth. A storm rolled in. Not of rain. Of memory. Lightning split the sky, and with each flash, a moment returned. A mother's last lullaby. A soldier's swallowed prayer. A lover's withheld goodbye. The valley glowed with stories buried too deep. Edda stood, her body no longer her own but a vessel. The harvesters bowed, not to her, but to what she had done. The hole began to fill, not with dirt, but with light. Not bright, but warm. The kind of warmth that followed grief, not joy. The boy stood. Now you must reap. She reached into the hole and pulled forth a mirror. Its surface shimmered, not with her reflection, but with every face she had worn, every truth she had feared. It showed not what was, but what had been denied. She turned, and the harvesters were gone. The reeds bent in farewell. The valley whispered thanks without breath. Edda walked on, past the valley, into the night that did not resist. The path ahead was not lit, but clear, and for the first time she did not fear what came next. The silence that followed was not empty. It was whole. Story 24. The Hollow Thrones. No one remembered when the thrones had last been filled. In the heart of the drowned city of Vathro's former reflection, a place that had only ever existed in whispers and shadows, stood a hall of obsidian spires and broken light. It had no roof. No need for one. The sky above had long since abandoned it. What remained was a spiral of forgotten authority, a circle of seats that had once governed 1,000 generations. Now only echoes sat upon them. Echoes and bones. Edda stepped into this place with the wind behind her. It did not howl. It watched. The silence she carried was no longer a burden. It was her language. The child was gone. Or perhaps ahead. It didn't matter any more. Edda's breath was measured, her steps deliberate. Every motion she made reverberated in a place where the past had nowhere else to go. She had learned not to fear the weight of memory. But what waited here was not memory. It was intent. Each throne bore a carving. Some in stone, others etched into remnants of gold, ivory, even petrified wood. Faces. Faces of those who once ruled through decree or death. Each one different, yet all bearing the same flaw. The eyes were hollow. Not empty. Hollow. Eyes that once watched the world tear itself apart, then fell silent as if they'd seen enough. They had not been destroyed. They had vanished. In the center of the thrones was no seat. Only a mirror. It lay flat against the floor, framed in metal that hummed when she approached. Not a reflection. An invitation. Edda stood above it and did not see herself. She saw her father. Not the man who raised her in the faded woodlands of Jorah, but the truth beneath him. The man who once walked with a bell in his chest, a silence in his mouth, and a burden on his back. A man who had looked into this very mirror and had chosen to lie. Not out of malice. Out of love. Out of fear. The mirror did not punish him. It preserved him. Edda saw his choice unfold in layered memory. Sacrifices made, people turned away, warnings unspoken. Each silence a shield. Each word held back a blade unswung. She wept not for his deception, but for his loneliness. He had died in silence because he believed it would save her. It hadn't. Edda reached down. Her fingertips touched the mirror. It rippled. She did not fall. She sank. Down through time that had no mercy. Down through voices that screamed and begged and sang and cursed. Down into the marrow of Vathros, the part no map dared depict. The language of the city had changed here. No longer bells and silence. Now it was heartbeat and breath. She landed in a chamber not made by hands. Bones arched into vaults above her, ribs of something older than the city, older than memory. At the far end stood a cradle. Inside, not a child. Not even a form. An idea. It pulsed. The cradle was filled with whispers. Not words. Whispers of choices never made. Of regrets too old to remember. Of futures too brittle to survive. Edda approached. The air thickened. Her silence grew louder. Then she heard it. A single voice. It did not speak. It begged. Not for release. For understanding. The voice belonged to no one and everyone. To the kings who had sat upon the hollow thrones. To her father. To the one who had stitched his lips shut. To the child who had led her. To the bell that rang without sound. The voice asked a question that could not be put into words. Edda answered with her silence. The idea in the cradle grew bright, then dimmed, then settled. It did not fade. It listened. For the first time in centuries, it listened. And it chose. The cradle shattered. Not in violence. In completion. Light bled from the cracks in the chamber. The bones groaned with release. The vaults above her trembled. And then, the thrones above filled with breath. Not with kings. With presence. With the essence of decisions made, truths owned, silences honored. Edda rose through the mirror. Back into the hall. The thrones were no longer hollow. But they remained silent. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they were listening too. At the center of the circle, the mirror vanished. In its place, a bell. Smaller than the one before. Unassuming. Edda approached. She did not ring it. She placed her hand upon it and waited. And in that waiting, 1,000 voices gathered. Not to command. To ask. To seek the silence that did not hide, but healed. And from the distance, far beyond the chamber, far beyond Vathros, far beyond any map or mountain, a single note sounded. Not a warning. Not a call. A promise. Edda smiled. She had not spoken in weeks. Maybe months. Time had lost its teeth here. But the silence between her and the world was now sacred. Not as a weapon. As a bridge. And far behind her, one of the thrones wept. Its tears fell like rain upon stone. Story 25. The River of Unseen Mouths. They had come too far to retreat, though every step forward meant walking deeper into what no one could explain and what no one dared remember. The wind that had once whispered grew mute, as if even it had grown fearful of what lay ahead. The ground beneath their feet was not dirt but memory, thick with the impressions of those who had walked this way and perished in silence. Edda felt each footstep echo not through the valley but through herself. In the gloom of an ever-dimming sky, they reached a bank. Not of water, but of something more viscous, reflective like oil but moving like breath. It was not a river, but it wept like one. There were no ripples, yet the surface trembled with every heartbeat. And from within came murmurs, not voices, but mouths unseen, whispering truths too fragile to be said aloud. The river of unseen mouths, called in the tongue of the forgotten, was once a divide between worlds, one of sound and one of sense. Edda knew without knowing that to cross it meant giving up something irreplaceable. But what was left to lose? She had shed names. She had burned her voice. She had watched a city dissolve into judgment and become silence incarnate. The others with her, those still unbroken, stood at the edge. Lys, the scarred acolyte. Ren, the orphaned soldier. Marith, with her glass-threaded skin. Each of them bore their own silences now. Not one asked how to cross. Not one asked if they should. Only Edda stepped forward, and when her toe touched the surface, the river sighed. It accepted her. Not as intruder. Not as heir. As penance. They walked. The current didn't carry them. They walked through the river, as if the liquid parted not for their bodies but for their will to continue. And with every step Edda saw faces beneath the surface, not drowned, not dead, waiting, some twisted in sorrow, others wide-eyed in endless screams. None moved, but all watched. They watched her. She heard the stories they couldn't speak. A child who swallowed her own tongue to stop a curse. A monk who burned his own scriptures to silence their lies. A woman who carved her truth into her bones because paper betrayed her. So many stories. So many silences. Each one anchoring the river in grief. Halfway across, Wren stumbled. Not from exhaustion, but from recognition. One of the faces was his mother. Another, his brother. Both gone to war, both presumed dead. But not here. Here, they endured in silence. He knelt, hands trembling, and tried to touch them. Edda pulled him back. "They're echoes," she whispered, her voice barely air. "You can't save what never screamed." He did not understand, but he obeyed. At the far bank, the river ended not with land, but with decision. A series of archways rose from nothing, each one inscribed with a different truth. Not in language, but in memory. Only the bearer could read their own. Edda stepped toward the first, and it wept. Her mother's voice. Her father's silence. The scream she never released the day she buried them both. She walked through. The others followed, each vanishing behind their own archways. On the other side, they were not the same. Edda emerged in a forest of mirrors. Trees reflected not her image but her consequences. Every branch showed a path not taken. Every leaf a betrayal barely avoided. And then the mirrors cracked. Because something had followed. It was not a creature. Not a ghost. It was silence itself, enraged at being disturbed. It had shape but no form. Movement but no direction. It stalked her, devoured reflections, and when it howled, the world didn't shake. It stopped. She ran. Each step shattered a mirror. Each breath became heavier. The silence fed on her guilt, on her doubt, on every time she chose silence over truth. It knew her. It hunted her not because she was loud, but because she dared to reclaim voice. At the forest's edge stood a monolith. Not stone, not metal, a tomb of song. She reached for it, and it opened. Not with hinges, with memory. Inside, the air sang. Not words, tones. A chorus of those she had lost, each note a forgiveness. She stepped inside, and the silence shrieked. It couldn't follow. The tomb wasn't sanctuary. It was reckoning. The moment she accepted what she had done, the silence couldn't touch her. It starved. It vanished. She emerged. Her companions were waiting. No one spoke. But something had shifted. Each carried a new light behind their eyes. Not hope. Not peace. Purpose. The journey had changed. No longer about survival. About ending something older than death. The road ahead led into night. But this time they carried silence as a blade, not a burden. And the river whispered their names as they left. Story 26. The Serpent's Choir. The dawn came veiled in a sickly orange light, as though the sky itself had burned during the night and had only now cooled into a bruise of fire and ash. Edda stood on the edge of the Vale of Thorns, the bell hidden beneath her cloak, its presence still resonating through the marrow of her bones. Behind her, the path was silence. Ahead, the choir waited. They were not singers. Not in the traditional sense. No lips moved. No lungs exhaled. but the sound they produced pierced every layer of thought and memory like rusted blades. It was not music. It was memory. Twisted, decayed, violent. The serpent's choir, as they were called in whispers and in blasphemous scripture, was not a people but a punishment. Each soul sentenced to the choir had spoken a truth that the world had not been ready to hear. Each had dared, in their own time, to give voice to the sacred silences others built kingdoms upon. And so the serpent took them. She didn't know whether the serpent was a god, a beast, a concept. She only knew that it waited at the center of the choir, and that she had been summoned by its song. The veil of thorns was not made of brambles or roses. The thorns were voices. Sharp, broken, flayed into shapes that could impale or caress. They spoke lies that sounded like prophecies and truths that burned like betrayal. As Edda stepped into the veil, they greeted her. She comes with the weight of 1,000 silences. She bears the bell that once wept for the sun. She will ring the world awake. Each whisper stabbed. Each echo bled. Her footsteps softened as she reached the circle's edge, a clearing of scorched ground, where the choir stood in spiral formation, their bodies bound by ropes of sound. They trembled not from fear, but from restraint. At the center was the serpent. It had no single shape. It was all shapes. It coiled in on itself, infinite and blind, its skin shifting with images of past sins and future regrets. It opened no mouth, yet its voice tore through the air. You carry the last note. Edda bowed her head, not out of reverence, but out of necessity. Looking at the serpent too long made her thoughts unravel. "Why me?" she asked. The choir screamed. One voice, then another, then all at once. Not in pain, in answer. Because you listened when others turned away. Because you wept when others forgot. Because you still believe silence can be sacred, but not safe. The serpent undulated, its coils rising into the sky, blotting out the light, weaving a canopy of shadows. You seek the bell's end. Yes, she whispered. Then give it to me. She reached for the bell. It fought her. It did not want to be surrendered. It rang within her ribs, a silent wail of resistance. But her fingers closed around it anyway, and she lifted it toward the serpent. The choir fell silent. The serpent struck, not at her, but at the bell. Its coils wrapped around the artifact, suffocating it in shadow, testing its limits. The bell screamed, not out loud, but into her mind. A scream made of loss and longing. Then a crack, a fracture along the bell's side, and from it poured not sound, but light. Visions of lives unlived, of words unspoken, of songs choked before birth. The choir moaned, overwhelmed by the memories flooding the clearing. Edda fell to her knees. "Why show me this?" she cried. The serpent tightened its hold. "Because you must choose." Choose what? Whether to end the silence or protect it. The choice was not metaphorical. The bell had always been a key, a vessel. It held the power to ring the world back into truth, to expose every hidden crime, every buried scream, every sacred hypocrisy. But doing so would tear reality apart. Or she could keep it whole, silent, safe, controlled. "Truth," she whispered. "It hurts." "So does silence," said the serpent. "And if I do neither?" "Then the world ends quietly." She stared into the serpent's infinite form, saw every era of betrayal and belief flicker across its skin, and knew there was no perfect choice, only one that was hers. She rose. The bell still hovered between her and the beast. Its crack glowed. and she did not take it back. She stepped forward. "Let them hear," she said. The bell rang. The choir shattered. The serpent convulsed. And the world changed. Forever. Story 27. The Frost and the Flame. The snow fell like ash. Not a flake among them was pure, not a drift untouched by the weight of history. As Edda stood upon the edge of the ruined valley, the wind spoke not of warning, but of memory. Cold did not bite her skin any more. She had long left behind the senses of the living. What stirred inside her now was no longer flesh, but the weight of choice. Behind her, the remnants of the choir stood in silence, fewer now than ever. Time had peeled them away like petals from a flower too exposed to survive. What remained were not warriors, not monks, not even people. They were echoes wrapped in bone and duty, and they followed her not out of faith, but out of the shared certainty that the end was not far. Before her, the gate to the hushed citadel stood ajar. It had never opened before. It had never needed to. The citadel did not beckon visitors. It absorbed them. She stepped forward. Inside, the cold was absolute. Not freezing. Absent. Even sound dared not enter this place. Her breath did not fog. Her footsteps made no echo. She moved like a ghost into a cathedral built for the forgotten. The walls were not stone. They were silence hardened into form. Each corridor turned upon itself, like a spiral written by grief. She passed no doors, no windows, only niches where once there might have been candles, or eyes, or something worse. Then she reached the chamber. It was not large. No throne, no altar, just a pool of water still as death and clearer than truth. In its center, a flame hovered, blue and quiet, suspended over nothing. He waited there. Not the man from before. Another. Older in pain. Younger in rage. His face bore the lines of all the choices he never made. His eyes were not his own. They were borrowed from every soul he'd consumed in silence. "You came," he said, though no sound passed his lips. She nodded. Her voice was gone. Had been since the bell. Had been since she traded song for understanding. Now, meaning moved differently between them. He pointed to the flame. "This is the final word," he thought at her. "It burns what cannot be forgiven. It leaves no remains. Only truth." She stepped forward. The flame pulsed. Her memories surfaced, not in sequence, but in sensation. Her mother's hum. Her brother's scream. The warm hand that had once pulled her from a river and then vanished forever. Her lips trembled. Her hands did not. She reached toward the flame. And the citadel reacted. Walls breathed. Shadows shrieked. The silence broke like glass, and from it spilled the countless voices that had once fed the stillness. They screamed for her to stop, begged her to wait, to turn back, to consider. But she touched it anyway. The flame did not burn. It sang, not in music, not in sound, in recognition. And it wept. Tears of fire fell into the pool, and the reflection twisted. She saw herself, not as she was, but as she had been. A girl with too much faith. A sister with too much love. A weapon with too much mercy. He tried to stop her. She turned. "I see you now," she said without speaking. He faltered. She stepped into the pool. Water did not resist her. Fire did not consume her. They accepted her, claimed her, changed her. And when she emerged, she was not what she had been. The choir fell to their knees, though none knew why. The citadel groaned and folded upon itself. The frost cracked. The flame vanished. She had taken it. She had become it. And now nothing could stop the end. Story 28. The Breathless Labyrinth. The air had a weight to it now. It wasn't merely the density of mist or the heaviness of anticipation. It was something else. Something watching. Something listening. Every breath Edda took in the narrow corridor of silence pressed her ribs tighter, like unseen hands were gauging her resolve. And as she stepped through the stone mouth of the tunnel, lined not with bricks but with bones, the walls seemed to pulse with faint echoes of forgotten prayers. Or were they screams? She no longer wondered what was real. After what she had seen, after the city crumbled into ash and truth, reality itself had become a pliable veil. The bell no longer followed her. It had done its part. What clung to her now was memory and consequence. The labyrinth was older than the mountain it lived beneath. So said the murals, scratched in blood on stone. So whispered the monks whose tongues had long since been cut out. Edda remembered the old woman from Story 6, whose mouth was sewn shut not with thread, but thorns. Back then, Edda thought silence was cruelty. Now she knew it was a shield, because if you said the wrong name in this place, something would answer. The walls moved, but not by magic. They shifted with breath. Living flesh beneath stone. A city's buried lung. The kind that remembered your steps, tasted your fear, adjusted its path to better test your conviction. This was no mere maze. This was confession made manifest. She passed doors that were not doors. Some opened not with keys, but with secrets. And each time she tried to recall a comforting memory, of her mother's lullaby of warmth, of snow falling quiet on the monastery roof, those memories dissolved into screams. Not hers. Not yet. But soon. A boy's laughter rang out from the shadows. Young. Mocking. Familiar. No. No boy. Just the echo of her brother's voice. Jonan. Dead these many years. Drowned in the well after whispering a name he wasn't supposed to know. Their father had said it was an accident. But Edda remembered how the water had boiled the night before. How the ravens wouldn't land. She followed the laughter. Deeper. Down. As she turned left, a path she hadn't meant to choose, her fingertips brushed the wall. It bled. Just a trickle. Not blood, not paint, something in between. It smelled like regret, and she could almost hear it weep. Time passed differently here. It wasn't linear. Hours melted into moments. Memories layered like rotten parchment. Sometimes she'd blink and find herself back where she started. Sometimes the lantern flickered and she aged a year. At a fork in the path, a figure stood. Hooded. Tall. Motionless. She asked no questions. Only waited. The figure pointed. Edda obeyed. She hadn't spoken aloud in days. Maybe weeks. Her voice was no longer hers. It belonged to the mountain now. To speak was to bleed power. And she had so little left. She came to a chamber shaped like an eye. On its stone floor, 7 names were etched in a spiral. One was hers. Another, Jonan. The rest she did not recognize, but their syllables burned on her tongue when she tried to read them. In the center of the room, an altar breathed. Literally. It rose and fell, chest-like, sighing through cracks that glowed with faint ember light. She placed her hand upon it. The altar screamed. Not in sound, in thought. Her mind split. Images poured in. Story 14, Story 17, Story 20. All the horrors she thought she'd left behind surged forward, reassembled, reshaped. The altar showed her what came next. The ending. The death of all sound. but also its beginning, a seed, planted in her heart. She tore her hand away. The altar wept ash. She collapsed, and when she woke, the boy was there. Jonan, older now, smiling, but his eyes were hollow. "Time isn't real here," he said. "No," she agreed, "but guilt is." He took her hand. They walked together, past walls that sang now, not words, not melody, just longing. The next door was waiting, and it had her name carved in the flesh. Story 29. The Tolling of Names. No path had ever been so narrow. Edda stepped carefully between walls of smoke, each swirl filled with faces that no longer had breath. She could not touch them, but she could feel the cold ache of their eyes upon her. The ground beneath her feet was brittle with unspoken words, as if each step risked snapping another secret in half. This was not the end, though it smelled like endings. It was the silence before the verdict. The bell she had once carried now led the way, floating just ahead, its clapper still absent, its body resonating with something deeper than sound. She had thought silence was absence. She now knew better. It was presence intensified, a pressure building, about to burst. Her footsteps echoed without noise. Every structure in this new place, if it could be called a place, was built from resonance. Archways rang hollow with questions that had never been asked. Towers leaned not from age, but from burden. And in the distance, a dome pulsated with the rhythm of withheld truth. She entered it not through doors, but through remembrance. The dome accepted her presence like an old wound welcoming the blade again. Inside were 12 thrones, each occupied by a figure cloaked in static. They did not move. They did not speak. But she knew these were the keepers of names. They had waited for her. Not her, perhaps, but what she represented. A choice unspoken. A word that refused to die. The bell rang without sound, and the figures stirred. One leaned forward, skin made of ruin, voice the scrape of bone against time. "What name do you bring?" Edda opened her mouth, but she had none. Not any more. Her name had burned away with the city. What remained was a shell of echo, a vessel of grief. She knelt, not in submission, but in declaration. She placed her hand over her heart and waited. Another figure rose. This one bled light from every joint. It asked again, "What name do you bring?" She rose slowly and spoke the only name she remembered. Not hers, not his, not theirs, but the name of the silence. The true name of the bell. A name not meant for ears. The thrones shattered. In their place rose voices. Countless, layered, shrieking and whispering, weeping and laughing. Each voice was a story denied. A truth buried. A life extinguished without witness. And all of them now surged into her. She fell, but not into darkness. Into memory. Each soul wrapped around her became a scene. She saw them as they had lived, as they had loved, as they had lost. And in their pain she found clarity. Not of purpose, but of burden. She had not come to end the silence. She had come to make it known. When she rose again, the dome had become glass. Beyond it stood every soul that had once waited in shadow. None spoke. None needed to. Their presence was demand enough. The bell rang once. This time the sound was real. It was not loud. It was final. The ground split. From the divide rose names. Not written. Not shouted. Lived. Each name took shape, human and not, and walked past her. Some wept. Some laughed. All looked her in the eye. And with each passing, She felt less of herself remain, until she was nearly gone. Then the last name approached. It was hers, but not the name given at birth. The name she had earned. The one forged in silence, tempered in death. Edda, the witness. The name settled into her bones, and the bell fell silent again. But it did not stop glowing. A voice she did not recognize spoke from within. Now comes the price. She nodded. The final path opened, not forward, but inward. A spiral of self, leading to the heart of what she had carried all this time. She walked it without fear. And at the center she found a mirror. Not glass. Not silver. Flesh. It was her. Younger. Older. Neither. Both. The version of herself that had never spoken. The part she had buried beneath duty and loss. "Do you forgive me?" the reflection asked. Edda touched the mirror. It was warm. "I remember you," she said. The mirror cracked, and from it spilled not blood, but song. Not words. Just tone. Just ache. The dome faded. The ground turned to ash. The souls were gone. The bell hovered. And she stood at the edge of the final veil. Behind it lay the ending, or the truth. She did not know which was worse. But she stepped forward. Story 30. The silence beyond the bell. The air tasted of stillness. Not quiet. Not peace. But something beyond. The kind of silence that existed before sound itself, the hush that preceded creation, that outlasted destruction. Edda stood at the edge of it, barefoot upon the ash and the light, the remains of Vathros behind her and a horizon unformed before her. What remained of the world was choice, and in that a terrible freedom. The bell no longer hung in the air. It had melted into something unseen, something felt in the marrow, in the pause between breaths. But its presence lingered, in her fingertips, in her heartbeat, and in the child, who now no longer looked like a child. They, stood beside her, no taller than before, but heavier somehow. Denser. Their eyes held stars that had not yet burned. Their voice, when it came, was not heard but understood. "You may speak now." Edda did not respond immediately. Her throat worked, parched not from thirst, but from lifetimes of silence. When she did speak, it was not her voice. It was every voice she had ever silenced, every scream unuttered, every whisper stifled. "Where do we go now?" The being turned, its gaze not on her, but on the space where time unraveled like thread. "There is no path. There is only what you make. The bell chose you not because you were strong or pure. It chose you because you knew the price of silence." Edda blinked. Her hands trembled. She saw in her palms not lines of fate, but cracks of history. Blood that had dried. Lives she had held. Secrets she had buried. "Then I must make a world where silence is not feared." "You must." They stepped forward together. The light did not grow. The darkness did not recede. Instead, meaning bloomed. Each step Edda took drew a line in the nothingness. That line became a river. Another, a path. She spoke, and her voice became the sky. She cried, and her tears seeded forests. She remembered, and history began. But it was not easy. From the ashes of Vathros rose ghosts. Not specters of the dead, but ideas twisted by suffering. The old silence, weaponized and hungry. It coiled and hissed, taking form not as monsters, but as doubts. "You are not worthy. You are alone. You will fail." Each whisper was a chain, and Edda felt them cling, tighten. Her knees hit the new earth. Her breath stuttered. But she did not look away. She opened her mouth, and she screamed. The sound shattered nothing. It broke no sky, tore no mountain. But it echoed. It echoed. It echoed. And from the echo came voices. Others. First one. Then 10. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Some came from memory. Some from dreams. Some from the future. All had been silent. All now spoke. Their words were not speeches, not declarations. They were truths. Painful, beautiful, mundane. A girl's laughter in the rain. A mother's warning before the war. A lover's goodbye. A rebel's call. A prisoner's last word. Edda rose. The chains cracked. The ghosts hissed. And she walked through them. Her skin bled memory. Her bones sang names. Her breath burned with the bell's once voice. But she did not stop. She built. A city of windows, none of them watching. A hall with no thrones, only tables. Streets that curved not in grids, but in spirals, so all paths crossed. Gardens grown from forgotten seeds. And in its center, not a temple, not a tower, but a space, open, waiting. People came, first in dreams, then in footsteps. Not many, not at first, but enough. Enough to listen, enough to remember, enough to speak. And as they did, the ghosts weakened. The silence changed. It became something sacred again. A pause before choice. A breath before truth. A cradle for thought. The child being came to her one last time. Their eyes dimmed now, not in power, but in need. You do not need us any more. Edda nodded. I never did. Then we return. They vanished. Not in flash or fade, but in a blink of unimportance, as if they had always been her. And maybe they had. Edda sat. The city around her pulsed with stories. People told them freely. And some chose to hold silence. Not in fear, not in guilt, but in love. Because now, finally, it meant something else. And far away, in the place where no one walked, a bell that no longer existed rang once more. No sound, only truth. And it was enough.